If you've ever wondered how an educational system can support people to lead fulfilling lives, I think this is the episode you've been waiting for. We go from the principles of active learning all the way through practical steps to transform educational leaders, but also educational systems. This is the work of Peter in Educraftor, and I'm really so excited to be sharing this with you today. Hello and welcome. I am Carmen Tomas, your host today, and I'm delighted to be introducing Peter. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Carmen. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Yes. So Peter has worked in education for over 2 decades, and since 2017, he launched Educraftor, which we will talk a little bit, which is kind of the topic for today. But more specifically, he's recently launched the Educraftor Academy. And that's going to be the focus of our interview because it's a very ambitious, very much a needed initiative. And so thank you, Peter, for coming here today. And I'm going to start inviting you to talk about your vision. And first of all, so you talk about two things that normally a lot of people might not be putting together in the way you do. You talk about active learning and you talk about systemic change. So let's start talking about learning because this is part of your vision for Educraftor.
Okay. Yes. So the vision is to enable all human beings really to lead flourishing lives. And the way we do this in society today is through our education system. So we engage in education to be able to learn new things that will then help us in our lives. And through that, then help society. And a big part of this journey to education is maturity, a human maturity process. So we're very, very used to talking about how children mature, go through different maturity steps. Around the age of 5, they start understanding that they're a different person. They get their own ego coming. The teenage years, they go through puberty and they become much more of an independent human being. And if you would look at this from an adult maturity point of view, then you would call this an impulsive mind. So adult maturity is something that we don't usually talk about. And it's not part of most education systems that I have come across. There might be that it's talked about somewhere, but I haven't come across it yet. The whole thing has been studied a lot by Professor Robert Keegan from Harvard. When we come out of this puberty, then about 60% of the population goes into something called socialized mind. And that is that we get our energy, we get our identity, personality comes a lot from what the people around us are. So we get that from the socialized community. And I am assuming this is also one of the reasons why laws work, why rules work in our society, because the bulk of the population is in this, that, okay, I'm now part of this tribe, this society, and therefore I should adhere to the rules. An impulsive mind doesn't necessarily do that. And the criminal element in our societies, for example, a big part of them belongs to this impulsive mind part. These, even if I talk about this as levels, they're not necessarily that. We have different parts of it. And we need this kind of background to understand what we actually do. Bear with me for a minute. The next phase in here is self-authoring mind. And the self-authoring mind is where we go out and we create our own lives. And now if we're starting to look at people, we go through this, what we call life crisis. So midlife crisis, for example. And we change as human beings. We start doing things that the people around us think that are completely crazy. But for us, they make super sense, right? I've always wanted to drive motorcycles. Now I suddenly buy a motorcycle and start driving motorcycles, right? I mean, I've driven motorcycles my whole life. So this is not the crisis I go through, right? But we can all identify these kind of people that suddenly there is a divorce and they go travel the world or whatnot because they are not, the group is not conforming who you are anymore because you have going past that. And eventually we become wise, or at least some of us become very wise. Then we're talking about, the transformative mind. We are able to look at people from a more objective point of view. So look at our whole life from an objective point of view and look at everything. So we go from the subjective to the objective through this. And if you're really objective, you can then look at people's own paradigms, and you can kind of find the connection points. How do we work together, for example? So a great example of this is Gandhi. He looked at even people from different religions and backgrounds, and they brought people together in peace. There are processes that can loosen up what we have within us. So these are kind of set structures, but there are iterative learning cycles, learning processes that can loosen up these bonds. So we can actually mature more rapidly
Mm.
than we do through the normal education system at the moment. I can't quote the source, but I've read somewhere that if you go through a democratic education system throughout your whole education system, at time in education, 73% of those people become entrepreneurs. So they have a drive to go out and do something in the world themselves. And this is what our programs also shift within us. So we work on who am I as a human, in a sense. What are the processes I need to implement in my work usually? But then that becomes more like, what are the processes I have as a person when I do my work, right? What are the things I want? So dreams, needs, goals. So how do I want to change my organization? What do I want to do in my work? And then when you have identified all your dreams, needs, and goals, then you need, of course, to start the kind of other part of the active process. You need to start implementing. So you need to work on that topic that you want to learn very intensively. And it's going to be uncomfortable for you because this is not who you are yet. And then you need to go out and implement that learning into your day to day. So we talk about the breathing process. We come together very intensively. We shake everything up. We make the brain moldable. You become uncomfortable. And it's between the too uncomfortable and the comfortable where you find flow. So when you start finding that place where to be, then you get engaged with your work and inspired by your work. And then you can just do.
Yeah. So then, okay. So when people talk about active learning, this is what you think about. Okay. You think about a way and an approach of learning, which obviously from what you're describing is not your common approach in a school. Okay. So you're talking about focusing around this aspect of, you've talked about a person defining their dreams, needs, and goals. Yeah. And then starting a process around those. So this is very, very different to what we commonly find in most organizations and definitely most institutions of education in the mainstream, right? So you're talking about something different here. Okay, I think that's very important for then what Educraftor is going to do. But obviously, I just want to clarify because, okay, so you've given us sort of also a maturity model, based on, so I think you mentioned Robert Keegan, yeah? What you're suggesting is that a different approach to education might transform that pathway that you've described, like most people, 70% might fall in the category of the stages of maturity that you've kind of described. Yeah. So you're making a connection between living a fulfilling life that maybe you don't have to wait until you reach middle crisis to realize some things, but you're proposing that we initiate some processes very early on. Okay. So this is, that's really interesting. That's really radical as well, I think, to think of education in those terms, that education is not just an accreditation and a stamp that you get, you've done this, but you're looking at the entire life, the lifespan of a person and the role of education in that context, which I think is quite unusual as well to see it in that way. So, okay, so you're talking about active learning in the terms you've described now, and then I can immediately see that our education systems, the mainstream ones, they're not designed around that. I think we don't need to discuss that because I'm sure we agree that, or would you think that they are? This is the question.
If we look at what's commonly called 21st century curriculums today, I think it is in there. I think these kind of elements are part of the curriculums in many, many countries. It is just that the education systems do not have the tools yet. They don't know how to implement a 21st century curriculum, because to work in this way, you have to completely change the way you have been working.
Okay.
And to be able to change the way you have been working in a systemic way, you have to be aware of how you're working. So you have to, in a sense, okay, this is how we should be working. This is how we're working. what are the connections in a systemic way between these? What do we change for these things to happen here? And if you look at it as a system, it's actually quite easy to change, but very few people look at it as a system. So if you go into a classroom today still, so many of them are in rows, right? If the classroom is in row, the teacher is in the front. Maybe the teacher is walking among the students in the rows. Fair enough, they do this. But if the classroom is set up as small group tables, which it is in many countries now, then the teaching, the teacher cannot be in the same spot anymore because it's difficult for the students to actually, and of course, if the teacher is still teaching the same way as they were when it were in rows, then the students are going to be very difficult students because for them to give the attention to the teacher, they might have to, turn around in the chair. So you're actually activating the child to be active, and then that's a bad thing if you look at it from the old paradigm, so to say. So when you change the environment, it changes the way you have to teach. If you want to have the same kind of, even if with the same results, right? So the old methodology does not function in a new environment, but the new environment is a requirement to be able to do 21st.
So I think you're describing like the aspiration for this kind of learning, active learning, in the way you've described it, is set in the documentation. And I think I can see that. Everyone talks about this in with different labels, but definitely it's talked about. But what you're saying is you can't just introduce that without the context being ready for it. And you've given us one example. So with Educraftor, then you're setting this big challenge, a challenging aspiration then. So how are you going about it? And I know your Educraftor Academy is the first step towards this systemic change. So let's start with where you have started, because I know Educraftor Academy, as I've understood, is part of the Educraftor, which is even a wider range of steps. But you're starting with Educraftor Academy for leaders and teachers. So tell us about then how you intend to start this transformation, which is very ambitious and challenging. And I don't think I've known anybody else attempting this. So tell us how the academy is working and what's doing to start this change.
So the idea behind even starting the academy was that we need to be able to make what we do scalable. So in the past, we have done a lot of innovation projects in education. So we worked as coaches and consultants within many different organizations, quite a lot of them teacher training schools. We started our journey with doing a series of educational hackathons to the Ministry of Education in Finland. That work was then already, so when we do one program or one activity, it's always connected with other programs and activities. So in the sense, an innovation project for us has elements of the training programs, it has elements of the innovation events, it has elements of consulting, elements of mapping, and how do we change then as a system? So in a sense, the training programs are accelerants how to think systemically, how to yourself go through a maturity process, be aware that there are different stages, objectively look at your own learning and others' learning, work together with true team learning with other people that are going through these processes, and then also work for some sort of goal and output. So it's not only about creating knowledge, it's also about creating change. And change can then be creating a product, for example. It doesn't have to be creating a systemic change.
So, for example, just give us an example. If I was attending one of the workshops or programs, training programs for education leaders or teaching staff, I mean, I think it's quite broad. So just give me an idea what would happen. So I've turned up for your sessions. What am I asked to do?
That depends a little bit on where we are, what we do. But we use a process called do, notice, reflect, plan, new action. So you would most probably come in, maybe shortly introduce yourself. We would work in a dialogue ring. So we use dialogue as the tool for creating trust and for creating that kind of requirement for us to work with other people. The first action would be, in most cases, it would feel a bit meaningless in the beginning because we start with do. So we have in the past, for example, we have asked our participants to draw apples. So that's kind of the first task. Even, you introduce yourself, and then the first task is just to draw some apples. The next task is share those apples with a few other people. So basically, create a small group and you share what apples have you drawn. Then the task after that is, okay, now you have shared your apples. Now as a group, create more apples. So now you as a group have to draw apples together. And then as a group, as the next phase, you would present your apples. So first you have done something, and then you share what you do. So you have created some concepts, you share your concepts with somebody else. And then you're asked to work together with somebody. So now we go into how do I work with somebody else, and what is the output that we together create? Okay. And at this point, people start kind of challenging each other. They want to do the best apples, in a sense. This comes very quickly out of there. So they are starting to think creatively. And the reason for this is because the threshold to doing something together is so low. It's super low. Almost anybody can draw an apple.
Yeah.
So this collaboration starts from a super low threshold. It doesn't require too much intellectual capacity. We're all equals in a sense when we draw apples.
Yeah. No, but I think it's very clear. I think. Yes.
And then after that, we present what we have created together. And you can already see pride in these small teams or small work groups in the creation of drawing apples. And I'm now talking about adults, right? So going from this, that I am here, this is now we have created something together. First win. And the whole process goes like this. So then you can reflect on what I just talked through now.
Happen.
They can reflect on it themselves. So that's do, notice, observe. In this case, then, of course, think back. What were the things? And then reflect and then plan new action. Okay. So if you would now do it again, having this knowledge, what were the things you would do differently? Now you have also shared with everybody to draw apples. And then we give them the next one. Okay. Now with this knowledge, you go and you do it again. How
Okay.
are they different? And in most cases, they are very different.
Okay.
They are able to, through this notice and reflect, they are able to make their work much better.
So, Peter, am I understanding correctly here that really it's not a training session? What you're doing here, you're actually not engaging in the concepts, but in the experience of active learning and how to activate learning almost. I mean, is that where
Yes.
the design and concept is going?
So this is the core of the learning. So for you to be able to learn, you first need to figure out what is learning.
Exactly.
It's not a transfer of knowledge, right?
Okay.
So it's we reach for you having a competence at the end. So you won't even have the skill. You have actually the competence of doing it after the program, which means you need to embody the knowledge and you need to be able to reproduce something using this knowledge
Yeah.
over and over, right? Having the competence. So if you
So,
don't are very good at the abilities, you also need to work on your abilities for certain things. That having been said, the next phase is then. So usually a program would have different teams for different sessions. So thematic teams. Let's say we look at curriculum, we look at the work environment, we look at all of these things that you normally would do in an education system or with a leader. But we are not the holders of this content. The learners are. So because all of this is always context specific, I cannot know every single curriculum in the world if I'm working with a global group, right? I cannot know the local context, the school, the parents, the students, the school culture. So the learners would come in with this knowledge, and because they are working in teams, they would have a lot of knowledge already within their team. And our task is to activate all of this knowledge and encourage them to find new knowledge that they can implement in their own work according to their needs and goals. So of course, during this process, we would encourage them to go and find out what are your true needs. What are the jobs you need to get done in your day to day, and how can you solve these problems? So we're a process. It's a process program, not a content program. The content will automatically appear. And I mean, we as coaches, we have led schools, we have worked on school education level problems and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of knowledge, of course, that we can also bring into the conversation. This is not that, but the idea is for them to be able to go home and replicate what they have gone through here. So they can do that with their own staff and with their own colleagues and so on and so forth.
I know you've already run some some of these workshops, because I know they run as kind of projects with different types of institutions, and you're talking from government to schools to basically anyone in education. So tell us about some of the transformation, because I can immediately see how having that experience for an educator. So I'm very intrigued to hear what's the transformation you're seeing from engaging colleagues, different members in these workshops.
So when we ran the first hackathon, and all of these, what we use in the programs as well, all the elements are part of our events as well. A hackathon is an innovation event where you go from creating a team that has an idea, that has a concept, that creates a prototype. We did that in a teacher training school. Actually, the first one we ever did. This kind of confirmed our suspicion that what we're doing actually works. This was
Right.
already many years ago. The students who were always very passive during education became very active when they were allowed to do what they themselves want to do. And I remember going after the whole event and everything, all the processes were done. We were packing up and we're walking past the room of the headmasters, and two headmasters they're literally physically jumping up and down and going like, yes, yes, yes. And I was like, what is happening here? Because they had been doing very long days. So there was so much energy after this. And I had to go in. I went and so what's going on? And it's like, how can we implement this for all students? And then they explained this to me, that they had seen students who have basically never worked during school, so very
Suddenly.
engaged in the process. And the reason is that the student can do, they get responsibility, they get a mandate, and they can create what they want to create. And if you do education around the learning is automatic, because if I want to build a car, I will get all the knowledge I need to build that car. It's not like I'm going to go like, I don't know how to. If I want it, I'll do it. But you need to create that want engagement. Another program, which was also kind of similar funny situation, because after the first session when we were running this for a school, the headmaster, we had this kind of evaluation session. How did the first time go? Because what we knew is very new and different. She said that I can't see what you're doing. She was part of the training. She has also said, I've done so many trainings. You're doing nothing differently. Like, I can't see anything. But my teachers, they're all like changed. I have one teacher who was always like very passive, and now she's like reading an innovation group after the first session. So she took initiative and she started doing these kind of things in school. So how are you doing this change? And of course, it's because they are now aware of who they are and they have the mandate. So they get
Well, and they understand that it's so surprising, and they've probably now understood how do you learn. I can imagine why and how putting somebody through that basic learning experience, which combines the doing, the reflecting, the collaboration, the discussion, and then redoing and constructing and finally presenting. I can totally see how that, in a very simple way, will kind of simplify for people, like understanding. It's actually very simple, isn't it?
this is the funny part of it. I mean, all of this is so simple. Also, when
Yes.
people are saying like, I keep repeating this, we can very easily change education systems. We can also very easily do this kind of new digital platforms. All of it is very, very simple. The tasks themselves are simple, but we're changing the mindset of the system and the financiers, especially the financiers, the decision makers about finance. There we
Fantastic.
have a lot of work to do still,
Wow. So yeah,
because they're
let's
so used to the old.
I mean, we could go on and on, but I don't want to finish this interview and this episode without asking from the connection, because I know your aspirations and you're looking for systemic change. Okay. So let's now imagine, okay, we've had some leaders in education, how then does this connect with the systemic change? And I want to make that connection because I know you're not just thinking about the teacher training aspect. Educraftor is much more ambitious. So let's not forget about how you see the connection and again, your vision of how these change at the individual leader in education can have rippling effect, in the entire system. And how do you see that?
Okay, so the current goal, so we have the vision of enabling everybody. The current goal is to build 1,000 education innovation hubs across the world, and deliver at the same time digital infrastructure for education together with these hubs. Meaning, a hub is a neutral space where all the stakeholders around the digital learning ecosystem, so the learning ecosystem stakeholders and the digital layer stakeholders come together in dialogue. And the hubs across countries are benchmarked for best practices. So it's a process. How do we get the best practices from one country to another country going across the world? And for all of this when we have enough hubs, maybe 5, we need also some sort of global center of excellence for learning, for innovation in learning and education. These initiatives is moving forward. So at the moment, we're working on getting Education Innovation Hub up in Ukraine and in Estonia, and actively working on this topic. So if somebody is interested in helping out here, and we want more countries. I mean, I have discussions with several other countries, but I won't mention them here. So if you want to engage, then please do so. We have created, together with the university in Barcelona, who led the work actually, something called evolutionary framework for digital learning ecosystems. So how you can basically map what is your current situation, and then you can see the steps how to go forward. And having such a framework is key for you to be able to create a roadmap how to change your own education system.
So, yeah. So, and obviously by judging by the discussion we've had in this evolutionary framework, obviously the starting point is changing the people and changing your approach to learning, and then moving on to designing your tools and your systems around the model of learning that you want to implement, right? I mean, that's kind of...
First, we need to recognize it, right? To be able to do the change, we need to recognize that we need change and we want it at a personal, team, organization, city, region, country, levels.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think, I don't think anyone would argue with your principles, because you're talking about everything that is in every single strategy for education at every level. And you're combining this in a sort of principled manner. So we must start with the learning model we want. But in practice, none of this is obvious. I've not seen, it's not easy. It's not easy. So I really appreciate and support your mission, because I think it's working out how to go systematically about the changes and the scale of these changes. Because in everybody in education, we're always saying, the innovation happens in small pockets. So I think what you're touching on here and what you're leading everyone to think about is as moving away from the small pockets of good practice, which is a kind of mantra that I've heard for 20 years. But actually you're seriously saying, okay, let's get serious about systemic change and let's start with the people. So I think it's amazing, Peter. I think, parenthesis here, I'm not sure. I think we've got it. I think, Peter, it's an amazing enterprise, and thank you so much for leading this for everyone and at such scale. So I really wish you the best. Now, in terms of anyone listening to this, how could they get involved if they're really excited to know more? And what's the kind of help you need as well?
Well, at the moment, we're really looking for people and organizations who want to make this change. So I think we have done most of the thinking, and this now a little bit of ego comes through because we've been working on this for so long. We know at least the initial steps that needs to happen. This is, of course, about co-creation and co-design with the local ecosystem, local partners. So we're not coming and saying that we know what you need specifically, but we have the processes for that change. Please just contact us. Okay. Educraftor.com is the website. Peter@educraftor.com is directly to me. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
And where are your next steps? I'd love to see where you are at in 1 year. Do you have any specific goals?
Well, goal 5 is to get hopefully 2 education innovation hubs up and going. That's kind of and these education innovation hubs, they kind of include also everything else that we have been talking about. So they have the events and the programs and all of those dialogues and roundtables and so on. So it's not only the physical space, it's also the software, the human software, so to say, how to run it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Peter. And I'm sure I'm going to be keeping a close eye on your, where Educraftor goes this year, because I think it's going to be really exciting. Thank you very much for your time and sharing.
Thank you for having me, Carmen. It's been a pleasure.